Welcome back to day 3 of Hobbit Camp 2018. Signum University, specifically Signum Academy. I'm Wesley Shantz, and Sharon Hoff will be taking your questions. If you have any, feel free to send them in at any time. Again, we are on YouTube through the Signum University channel now, so that should be easy enough to find. We are a featured channel nested underneath of Signum University's channel, and as new videos come up, they'll be added there. So you can share those around and watch them anytime. And when you do, a reminder and a correction, because I think I've been saying this wrong. I'm pretty sure I have. It's signumuniversity.org/academy. And if I've been saying Signum U, it's because signumu.org is in the email down here. So sorry about that. It's not too late to register and check out the webpage for more information, signumuniversity.org/academy. You can use the question box if you're live with us here, or you can send questions and ideas in anytime through the email, camp@signumu.org. We didn't have any new questions sent in since yesterday. And so I'll move right into chapters 4 and 5 that we're reading for today. Overhill and Underhill, chapter 4, and chapter 5, Riddles in the Dark. The themes today, I wanted to look at specifically the riddle game, what it means to win, what it means to lose. What do Bilbo's and Gollum's riddles, the riddles that they ask each other, show us about how those two look at the world? I think there's some really interesting stuff there, and if you are interested in that, you can, of course, send in your thoughts as I'm going through. You can also journal and write about any disastrous camping trips that you've had, any ideas that you have about the new Gollums, the new characters that we meet, including the goblins and Gollum. You can write about the riddles or make up your own. You can make some illustrations of things like the stone giants, the ambushes, and the battles in the caves. We can draw the scene of the riddle game at Gollum's lake under the mountain. You can do some more active games and things like acting out the giants, singing and clapping and chanting the goblin song, and getting into that. And making magic rings is the suggested activity for this day of class. So as always, if you want to share things that you've created, you can send pictures and things through the email, and we'll share those with everyone here. So to start off, we have Bilbo thinking again about home and about his adventure. The summer is getting on down below, thought Bilbo. Haymaking is going on and picnics. They will be harvesting and blackberrying before we even begin to go down the other side at this rate. And the others were thinking equally gloomy thoughts, although when they had said goodbye to Elrond in the high hope of a midsummer morning, they had spoken gaily of the passage of the mountains and of riding swift across the lands beyond. They had thought of coming to the secret door in the lonely mountain, perhaps that very last moon of autumn, that very next last moon of autumn. And perhaps it will be Durin's day, they had said. Only Gandalf had shaken his head and said nothing. Dwarves had not passed that way for many years, but Gandalf had, and he knew how evil and danger had grown and thriven in the wild, since the dragons had driven men from the lands, and the goblins had spread in secret after the battle of the mines of Moria. Even the good plans of wise wizards like Gandalf and of good friends like Elrond go astray sometimes when you are off on dangerous adventures over the edge of the wild. And Gandalf was a wise enough wizard to know it. In the capitalization of the wild, we are told that this is a different place than we've been so far. And if we had been wondering about that aspect of the story, I'm going to hold off on it until next week. Next class tomorrow. And we'll talk about it more tomorrow and as we go forward. We're crossing into the wild now, and that makes a big change after the last homely house of Elrond and the elves in Rivendell. So we'll look at that more closely tomorrow. As they go up into the mountains, Bilbo had never seen or imagined anything of the kind. They were high up in a narrow place, with a dreadful fall into a dim valley at one side of them. They were sheltering under a hanging rock for the night, and he lay beneath the blanket and shook from head to toe. When he peeped out in the lightning flashes, he saw that across the valley the stone giants were out, and were hurling rocks at one another for a game, and catching them and tossing them down into the darkness, where they smashed among the trees far below, or splintered into little bits with a bang. Then came a wind and a rain, and the wind whipped the rain and the hail about in every direction, so that an overhanging rock was no protection at all. Soon they were getting drenched, and their ponies were standing with their heads down and their tails between their legs, and some of them were whinnying with fright. They could hear the giants guffawing and shouting all over the mountainsides. "This won't do at all," said Thorn. "If we don't get blown off or drowned or struck by lightning, we shall get picked up by some giant and kicked sky high for a football." I don't know if you guys have been following the World Cup, or if you're interested in soccer at all. So football here in Tolkien's English, of course, refers to what we call soccer in the United States. And the Giants are playing it wrong, right? They're throwing the balls, the stones at each other. So maybe it's something a little more like rugby, where football, soccer is closely connected with that. And maybe that's the way that some of these teams in the World Cup have been playing, so rough, as if they were playing rugby. The Giants, of course, are even more dangerous than trolls, right? There's no thought here of sneaking up and seeing what's going on. It's pretty obvious that this is not something the dwarves and Bilbo want to get involved with. They are going to steer clear if they can. And they are also out in the wind and rain, just like that troll episode, but worse, right? Because they're caught up in the mountains, they're exposed, they can't get under the cover of the trees or anything like that. And so they're in a sense a more extreme situation of what we've already seen with the trolls. Maybe that phrase "struck by lightning" caught your attention, since we talked about that a little bit. And as we go into this reading, maybe you'll notice that there's more games that we see, and more dangerous games that are taking place here. So keep thinking about those, and send me any ideas or thoughts that you have about that. Maybe you guys know some other stories about giants as well. I'm sure Tolkien did. I'm sure that our storyteller could tell us more about this. But he hurries us along, and again, we get another instance of camping now. So soon Fili and Kili came crawling back. They've gone to look for a better cave, holding on to the rocks in the wind. "We have found a dry cave," they said, "not far around the next corner, and ponies and all could get inside." "Have you thoroughly explored it?" said the wizard, who knew that caves up in the mountains were seldom unoccupied. "Yes, yes," they said, though everybody knew they could not have been long about it, for they had come back too quick. "It isn't all that big, and does not go far back." That, of course, is the dangerous part about caves. You don't know how far they go back sometimes, or where a passage behind may lead to, or what is waiting for you inside. But now Fili and Kili's news seemed good enough. So they all got up and prepared to move. The wind was howling, the thunder still growling, and they had a business getting themselves and their ponies along. So they make it up to the cave eventually and squeeze in with the ponies. But the wizard was taking no risks. He lit up his wand, as he did that day in Bilbo's dining room that seemed so long ago, if you remember, and by its light they explored the cave from end to end. We're given another reminder, not just struck by lightning, but also the light on the end of the wand, given another reminder to think back to that first night at Bilbo's. And when the narrator tells us that, of course, that's the dangerous part about caves, you don't know how far back they go, maybe you could think about some of the other caves that we've talked about already in the book. And maybe this warning about this particular cave in the mountains could connect with those as well. We saw like the Troll's Cave was full of this treasure his swords that the trolls didn't even know about. It seems like they didn't, well, of course, trolls are too big and the swords compared to them are too small for them to really worry about it. So they, in a sense, they didn't know how deep their cave went. In a similar way, we heard about the side door that goes into the Lonely Mountain. And so we'll have to see if that cave too has got some secrets to it. Question here about Tolkien being the narrator. Could Tolkien be the narrator? In a sense, I think yes. He, of course, in our framework for the story we were talking about yesterday, Tolkien writes the story down and sends it to the publisher, and the publisher gives it to his little boy to look at. And so we, thanks to that young man, Rainer Unwin is the boy's name. Thanks to him, we have the story now. So yeah, in some sense, Tolkien has to be involved with telling the story. But I don't know if we can say that he is the narrator. There's more to it, and we'll look at something about that in a minute here. Someone else here, this is a question from Lucy. I've read that Gandalf's eyebrows are longer than his hat. How is that possible? Great question, Lucy. Something that we're told very early on. Yeah, I didn't put it on a slide, but it is a great description of Gandalf. He's got eyebrows that stick out further than his hat. What does that make you think about him as a character? What does his eyebrow length help to suggest about Gandalf? I know your question is, how is that possible? As we'll see, Gandalf does a lot of things that seem impossible, and yet we're asked to understand that he knows what he's doing, at least most of the time. So I'm sure that there's a reason for that. I don't know quite what it is, but it might be connected to his magical abilities that come in handy here. Bilbo's dream. So it turned out to be a good thing that night that they had brought little Bilbo with them, after all. For somehow he could not go to sleep for a long while, and when he did sleep, he had very nasty dreams. He dreamed that a crack in the wall at the back of the cave got bigger and bigger, and opened wider and wider, and he was very afraid but could not call out or do anything but lie and look. Then he dreamed that the floor of the cave was giving way, and he was slipping, beginning to fall down, goodness knows where to. At that he woke with a horrible start, and found that part of his dream was true. A crack had opened at the back of the cave, and was already a wide passage. He was just in time to see the last of the ponies' tails disappearing into it. Of course, he gave a very loud yell, as loud a yell as a hobbit can give, which is surprising for their size. So, just like this cave is bigger than it looks, Bilbo's yell bigger than it looks like it should be for him. Gandalf's eyebrows bigger than it looks like they could possibly be. Anyway, Bilbo's yell, it doesn't save the ponies. Very sad. We hear the ponies are doomed, but doesn't save the dwarves either. They're already tackled by 6 goblins each or something like that, right? But it does save Gandalf. So it's a good thing Bilbo's along. And it's a good thing he has such interesting dreams also. He calls out, and there's a flash and a smell of gunpowder, and Gandalf is nowhere to be seen, and a few goblins are lying dead. So one thing that Gandalf's powers we heard about already, besides his eyebrows being long, he is associated with fireworks from the very start. That's what Bilbo knows about him. He makes such wonderful fireworks. And they don't only look like flowers, apparently they also explode like gunpowder, right? And they are deadly. So Gandalf is away. Meanwhile, the rest are being marched down into the mountain. Now there came a glimmer of a red light before them. The goblins began to sing or croak, keeping time with the flap of their flat feet on the stone, and shaking their prisoners as well. Clap, snap, the black crack, grip, grab, Pinch, nab, and down, down to Goblin Town you go, my lad. Clash, crash, crush, smash, hammer and tongs, knocker and gongs, pound, pound far underground, ho ho, my lad. Swish, smack, whip, crack, batter and beat, yammer and bleat. Work, work, nor dare to shirk, while goblins quaff and goblins luff, round and round far underground below, my lad. So there's a taste of the Goblin song. And it's a little odd because in some ways it sounds similar to some other songs that we've already heard. The dwarves are introduced with a couple of songs too. And one of their songs is even about breaking and smashing stuff. Remember? They sing about breaking Bilbo's plates. The important thing, though, they don't actually do it. Where the dwarves are singing about smashing things, they're actually taking really good care of them. And then the dwarves sing that beautiful song about their journey and their quest, their adventure to recover their gold from the dragon. We also meet the elves with the elf song that they sing, Tra-la-la-lally. And that's a really happy, upbeat kind of song. It's a little silly. It's partly just laughter. And the goblin song is also partly laughter, right? Ho, ho. It's a very different sounding laughter. And we mentioned last time, someone was asking, are goblins the same as orcs? Yeah, it seems like they are. And we're about to hear a little bit more about the past and the history between the goblins or orcs and dwarves and their battles with elves in the long ago time. Once we come down to meet the Goblin King. So they ask Thorin and all what they're doing up here in the mountains. He gives an answer, not a very good one, I guess. He is a liar, O truly tremendous one, said one of the drivers. Several of our people were struck by lightning in the cave when we invited these creatures to come below, and they are as dead as stones. Also, he has not explained this. He held out the sword which Thorin had worn, the sword which came from the troll's lair. The great goblin gave a truly awful howl of rage when he looked at it, and all his soldiers gnashed their teeth, clashed their shields, and stamped. They knew the sword at once. It had killed hundreds of goblins in its time, when the fair elves of Gondolin hunted them in the hills or did battle before their walls. They had called it Orcrist, goblin cleaver, but the goblins called it simply biter. They hated it and hated worse anyone who carried it. Murderers and elf friends, the great goblin shouted. Slash them, beat them, bite them, gnash them, take them away to dark holes full of snakes, and never let them see the light again. He was in such a rage that he jumped off his seat and rushed at Thorin with his mouth open. Terrifying. But it's terrifying for who, right? For the dwarves, yeah, they're in a lot of danger here, and Bilbo, of course, terrifying for them. But the goblins are terrified too, terrified of this sword, Orcrist in the elf language. So orc, goblin. Goblin cleaver, in the goblins' way of saying it, is simply biter. So goblin cleaver in our language, and biter in the goblin language. They also know their history. They know about these wars and battles and hunting expeditions. It sounds like the elves hunted the goblins. Those beautiful swords that they found in the Twirl's cave were put to some serious use in old days. And we've got another question here. Did the goblins or elves win in the Goblin Wars? Well, in the short term, it sounded like the goblins won. They destroyed Gondolin, that beautiful city, and apparently no one is left who can make such amazing swords. So the goblins got a good punch in the fight. It remains to be seen who's going to win this war. And that's kind of beyond what we're going to talk about in this class, because The Hobbit, although it's got a big battle, doesn't really give the end of the story. If you want more of the story, there's more books you can read. The Lord of the Rings. I'm going to talk about that in just a second here, but not too much. Yeah, it sounds like that battle, that war is still going on at this point in the story. So Gandalf swoops in, rescues them, they escape, but only so far. Then the goblins are able to sneak up on them and tackle from behind Dwalin, who's carrying. Is it Dwalin carrying Bilbo? Oh, I might be getting that wrong. He falls, knocks his head against something, and is out cold. We wake up in chapter 5 to complete miserableness. When Bilbo opened his eyes, he wondered if he had, for it was just as dark as with them shut. No one was anywhere near him. Just imagine his fright. He could hear nothing, see nothing, and he could feel nothing except the stone on the floor. Very slowly he got up and groped about on all fours till he touched the wall of the tunnel. But neither up nor down it could he find anything. Nothing at all. No sign of goblins, no sign of dwarves. His head was swimming, and he was far from certain even of the direction they had been going in when he had his fall. He guessed as well as he could, and crawled along for a good way, till suddenly his hand met what felt like a tiny ring of cold metal lying on the floor of the tunnel. It was a turning point in his career, but he did not know it. He put the ring in his pocket almost without thinking. Certainly it did not seem of any particular use at the moment. He did not go much further, but sat down on the cold floor and gave himself up to complete miserableness for a long while. He thought of himself frying bacon and eggs in his own kitchen at home, for he could feel inside that it was high time for some meal or other, but that only made him miserabler. Man, miserabler than complete miserableness is pretty bad. In this moment, we're told this is a turning point. What is it that's the turning point here for Bilbo? Um, you can think about it in terms of like a storyline, right? A storyline going up and then turning. You could also think about it like if you had a graph of how happy Bilbo is, happiness is up, miserableness is down. Maybe this is a turning point where he hits the bottom of miserableness, then goes a little lower, but he's about to turn and come back up again. So, right, maybe meeting the trolls was pretty low, meeting the elves was pretty high on the happy scale. Now, down in the bottom, where he's alone in the dark and is missing home again, missing bacon and eggs, and wishing for that makes him even sadder. Okay. We had a question here from Lucy again. Didn't the Dark Lord destroy Gondolin? All right, Dark Lord, capital letters. Yeah, he's mentioned, and he's mentioned in this chapter. I think he's called the Master of the Ring as well. Yeah, so there is some Dark Lord in the background. It's not clear who that character is and whether the Dark Lord that you're talking about, Lucy, is the same one that I'm thinking of in terms of this ring and the sequels to this story. The Dark Lord personally was not involved in those battles, but all of his servants, the goblins, the orcs, the dragons, we're told, helped to destroy Gondolin. And so, yeah, in some sense, he was behind all that. We see here, right, moments ago, Gandalf killed the Goblin King using the sword known as Beater, right, which belonged to the king of Gondolin. So again, this war between dwarves and goblins, elves and goblins, still going on. We see another mention of this here. When Bilbo's in complete miserableness, what does he do? He's feeling all around to see if he has anything useful. His tobacco, he can't smoke because he's got no matches, and maybe that's a good thing because it would bring unwelcome attention. But he does find that he's got his sword. Now he drew it out. It shone pale and dim before his eyes. So it is an elvish blade too, he thought, and goblins are not very near, and yet not far enough. But somehow he was comforted. It was rather splendid to be wearing a blade made in Gondolin for the goblin wars of which so many songs had sung. and also he had noticed that such weapons made a great impression on goblins that came upon them suddenly. Go back, he thought. No good at all. Go sideways? Impossible. Go forward. Only thing to do. On we go. So up he got and trotted along with his little sword held in front of him, in one hand feeling the wall, and his heart was all of a patter and a pitter. So it's not the thought of bacon and eggs that gets him back on his feet. That's sort of a step in the right direction, because then he's thinking, okay, it's time to do something, right? He thinks it's time to eat. Well, he's got no food on him. It's time to have a smoke. No, he can't light his pipe. Well, okay, what does he have though? In place of a walking stick, a sword, just like in his wishes long ago back at his hole, his nice comfortable hobbit hole. His wishes are coming true. Maybe not quite the way he intended, but he does have a sword, and I think nobody realized it until this moment. The sword that Bilbo's carrying is also one of those elvish blades. Maybe not as famous as the other two, but it does have that same power of glowing with light when enemies are near. And so it's with that light, that's an indicator of danger, that he's able to move forward, which is really interesting. Although he's afraid, although he's hungry and alone, Bilbo is going the only way he can go. We meet Gollum. Deep down here by the dark water lived old Gollum, a small slimy creature. I don't know where he came from, nor who or what he was. He was Gollum, as dark as darkness, except for two big, round, pale eyes in his thin face. He had a little boat, and he rowed about quite quietly on the lake, for lake it was, wide and deep and deadly cold. He paddled it with large feet dangling over the side, but never a ripple did he make, not he. He was looking out of his pale, lamp-like eyes for blind fish, which he grabbed with his long fingers as quick as thinking. He liked meat, too. Goblin he thought good when he could get it, but he took care they never found him out. He just throttled them from behind, if they ever came down alone anywhere near the edge of the water while he was prowling about. Then they very seldom did, for they had a feeling that something unpleasant was lurking down there, down at the very roots of the mountain. They had come to the lake when they were tunneling down long ago, and they found they could go no further, so there their road ended in that direction, and there was no reason to go that way, unless the great goblin sent them. Sometimes he took a fancy for fish from the lake, and sometimes neither goblin nor fish came back. So the narrator tells us that Gollum is there, a little bit about what Gollum looks like, and a little bit about what he does. But the narrator also tells us he doesn't know who or what Gollum was, or where he came from. We're told that there are things like this down at the roots of the mountain, things older and darker and more dangerous than goblins. And so just like the goblins snuck up behind on the dwarves and captured them, this is what Gollum does to the goblins when he gets a taste for eating them, which is pretty horrible, right? To be so horrible that you sneak up on other horrible monsters and eat them is pretty bad. It makes me think about that description of complete miserableness, right? And then getting a little more miserable when you wish for something good. That's a bad place to be in. Bilbo seems to be getting out of it, thanks to his sword and his bravery. Gollum, on the other hand, seems pretty set in his ways here. So he comes over wondering what this creature is that's found its way down to his lake. What's he got in his hands, said Gollum, looking at the sword, which he did not quite like. A sword, a blade which came out of Gondolin, said Gollum, and became quite polite. P'raps he sits here and chats with it a bitsy, my precious. It likes riddles, p'raps it does it? He was anxious to appear friendly, at any rate for the moment, and until he found out more about the sword and the Hobbit, whether he was quite alone really, whether he was good to eat, and whether Gollum was really hungry. Riddles were all he could think of. Asking them and sometimes guessing them had been the only game he had ever played with other funny creatures sitting in their holes in the long, long ago, before he lost all his friends and was driven away, alone, and crept down, down into the dark under the mountains. Very well, said Bilbo, who was anxious to agree, until he found out more about the creature, whether he was quite alone, whether he was fierce or hungry, and whether he was a friend of the goblins. You ask first, he said, because he had not had time to think of a riddle. So from the very start, we see this interesting reflection between Bilbo and Gollum, where they're sort of thinking the same thing about one another. They're both wondering, so who is this person? What is this thing? Where does it come from? What does it want? Is it hungry? Right? Are there more of it around? All right, so they're sort of feeling out the situation, and the way that they do this, Gollum suggests, is with a game, a riddle game. That's the only game Gollum knows, and it turns out that Gollum is right, that Bilbo does like riddles quite a bit, and there's also that little note there about in the long, long ago, Gollum had played with funny creatures sitting in their holes. We're told Gollum has long fingers. He used to live in a hole with other funny little creatures. So maybe that's reminding you of the description that we got of hobbits before. All right, so the first riddle. And I'll kind of read through these riddles. And as I do, please be sending in your thoughts here about what you notice going on with these different riddles that Gollum and then Bilbo ask back and forth. What do these riddles show us about each of these characters? What kinds of things do they like to ask about? What kinds of things do they have an easy time guessing or a hard time guessing? Do some of the riddles seem easy to you? Do they seem hard? Were you surprised by any of these? And especially as we get towards the end, I'm really curious to hear your thoughts about winning this competition and losing, and what winning and losing looks like for these characters. All right. So they agree that they're going to start with riddles, and then Gollum hissed, "What has roots as nobody sees, is taller than trees. Up, up it goes, and yet never grows." "Easy," said Bilbo. "Mountain, I suppose." "Does it guess easy? It must have a competition with us, my precious. If Precious asks, and it doesn't answer, we eats it, my precious. If it asks us, and we doesn't answer, then we does what it wants, eh? We show it the way out, yes?" "All right," said Bilbo, not daring to disagree, and nearly bursting his brain to think of riddles that could save him from being eaten. 30 white horses on a red hill. First they champ, then they stamp, then they stand still. Okay. So both of them have an easy time with the first riddle that they ask. That was all he could think of to ask. The idea of eating was rather on his mind. It was rather an old one, too, and Gollum knew the answer as well as you do. Did you know the answer? "Chestnuts, chestnuts," he hissed. "Teeth, teeth, my precious, but we has only 6. You can imagine him smiling with his 6 teeth. How awful. So teeth, white horses on a red hill. All right. Chestnuts seems to be a word that's used for old riddles, right? Easy riddles, ones that are easy to crack, right? To guess. And there's something going on there too, where Bilbo asks his riddle because he's hungry, and Gollum answers easily because he's thinking already about teeth and food as well. Gollum's first riddle is easy because that's where they are, right? They're under the mountain. So they start out easy. Next, Gollum asks, voiceless it cries, wingless flutters, toothless bites, mouthless mutters. Half a moment, cried Bilbo, who was still thinking uncomfortably about eating. Fortunately, he had once heard something rather like this before, and getting his wits back, he thought of the answer. Wind! Wind, of course, he said, and he was so pleased that he made up one on the spot. This'll puzzle the nasty little underground creature, he thought. An eye in a blue face saw an eye in a green face. That eye is like to this eye, said the first eye, but in low place, not in high place. Okay, great. So Lucy, you point out rightly, I think, Gollum's riddles are all dark, while Bilbo's riddles are a lot lighter. And that's what he points out here too. He's going to use a light type riddle to go against this nasty little underground creature that he's talking, right? Yeah, the way that Gollum describes the wind certainly sounds pretty dark. Maybe you could imagine other ways of talking about the wind, which might be more light, right? But even when Gollum asks about something that's up there in the world, he makes it sound dark and awful. And when Bilbo asks his riddles, he makes them sound light and happy. Eyes and faces, and how they're like each other. So this one is kind of hard for Gollum. He hisses. He had been underground a long, long time and was forgetting this sort of thing. But just as Bilbo was beginning to hope that the wretch would not be able to answer, Gollum brought up memories of ages and ages and ages before, when he lived with his grandmother in a hole in a bank by a river. Sis, my precious, he said, sun on the daisies, it means it does. But these ordinary, above ground, everyday sort of riddles were tiring for him. Also, they reminded him of days when he had been less lonely and sneaky and nasty, and that put him out of temper. What is more, they made him hungry. So this time he tried something a bit more difficult, more unpleasant. It cannot be seen, cannot be felt, cannot be heard, cannot be smelt. It lies behind stars and under hills, and empty holes it fills. It comes first and follows after, ends life, kills laughter. Unfortunately for Gollum, Bilbo had heard that sort of thing before, and the answer was all around him anyway. Dark, he said, without even scratching his head or putting on his thinking cap. So, this one is literally a question about dark, just like Bilbo's was literally a question about light, right? It's the sun and the daisies. For Bilbo, it's not too hard because they're surrounded by darkness. For Gollum, it is because he has to remember till long, long ago when he remembers being around the light. Yeah. So here's a good question. Gollum and Bilbo seem to know each other's riddles. I've heard that Gollum was actually like a hobbit before he went into the mountain. Is that true? That seems to be the suggestion here. We get little hints that that might be true. We mentioned his he's a little underground creature, as Bilbo says. He used to live in holes. He used to have little friends that he told riddles with. And it sounds like Bilbo has told riddles with his friends too. So that seems likely. It seems like that's the case. Next he asks, a box without hinges, key or lid, yet golden treasure inside is hid. And he only asked this to gain time until he could think of a really hard one. Okay, but this one proves to be a stumper for Gollum, actually. He does eventually get it, though. He gets it by remembering talking with his grandmother. Yeah, he was a store, says Lucy. So the divisions of the hobbits and their history is given to us, not in this book, but in the Lord of the Rings, in the beginning of the Fellowship of the Ring. We hear more about this story. Yes, so you have read on. That's great. When Gollum remembers finally about eggs and of course thinking about food again, he asks what he thinks is going to be an easy one. Alive without breath, as cold as death, never thirsty, ever drinking, all in mail, never clinking. He also in his turn thought this was a dreadfully easy one, because he was always thinking of the answer, but he could not remember anything better at the moment, and he was so flustered by the egg question. All the same, it was a poser for poor Bilbo, who never had anything to do with the water if he could help it. I imagine you know the answer, of course, or can guess it as easy as winking, since you are sitting comfortably at home and have not the danger of being eaten to disturb your thinking. Bilbo sat and cleared his throat once or twice, but no answer came. After a while, Gollum began to hiss with pleasure to himself. Is it nice, my precious? Is it juicy? Is it scrumptiously crunchable? He began to peer at Bilbo out of the darkness. Half a moment, said the Hobbit, shivering. I gave you a good long chance just now, although Bilbo was also teasing Gollum in the middle of him trying to think. It must make haste, haste, said Gollum, beginning to climb out of his boat onto the shore to get at Bilbo. But when he put his long webby foot in the water, a fish jumped out in a fright and fell on Bilbo's toes. Ugh, he said, it's cold and clammy. And so he guessed. Fish, fish, he cried. It is fish. What happens here seems to be that Gollum gives Bilbo the answer by trying to come get him, by getting a little over-eager in his excitement. Gollum disturbs a fish when he splashes in the water. And normally he would have seen that fish, right? He would have caught that thing, but he was looking at Bilbo and focused on this game. So that fish jumps up and lands on Bilbo's toes and gives him the answer. As frightened as he is, it pops into his head when it lands on his foot there. So it's kind of interesting. We saw something similar with the trolls. You might remember the trolls are so busy trying to figure out how to eat the dwarves that they get delayed and delayed and are kind of their own undoing, right? They're their own worst enemy there with a little help from Gandalf. It's the same kind of thing here. Gollum is his own worst enemy. And maybe you could see other examples of this as we go along. So this one inspires Bilbo's next riddle. No legs lay on one leg, 2 legs sat near on 3 legs, 4 legs got some. It was not really the right time for this riddle, but Bilbo was in a hurry. Gollum might have had some trouble guessing it if he had asked it at another time. As it was, talking of fish, no legs was not so very difficult, and after that the rest was easy. Fish on a little table, man at table, sitting on a stool, the cat has the bones. That, of course, is the answer, and Gollum soon gave it. Then he thought the time had come to ask something hard and horrible. This is what he said. This thing all things devours, birds, beasts, trees, flowers, gnaws iron, bites steel, grinds hard stones to meal, slays king, ruins town, and beats high mountain down. This one is a real stumper for Bilbo. Poor Bilbo sat in the dark, thinking of all the horrible names of all the giants and ogres he had ever heard told of in tales, but not one of them had done all these things. He had a feeling that the answer was quite different, and that he ought to know it, but he could not think of it. He began to get frightened, and that is bad for thinking. Gollum began to get out of his boat. He flapped into the water and paddled to the bank. Bilbo could see his eyes coming towards him. His tongue seemed to stick in his mouth. He wanted to shout out, "Give me more time, give me time." But all that came out with a sudden squeal was, "Time, time." Bilbo was saved by pure luck, for that, of course, was the answer. Ha! So lucky again. This time, Gollum doesn't really give him the answer in the same way by splashing a fish onto his foot, but in a way he does, right? He makes Bilbo so nervous that Bilbo can't even say, "Give me more time," which isn't the right answer, but he can squeak out time, time, which is the right answer. So Bilbo's fear saves him here. Gollum's frightening appearance, causes the fear. But the narrator tells us Bilbo was saved by pure luck. Right? He didn't mean to give an answer, but he does. And good for him. Which means he gets one last chance. So Gollum was disappointed once more. Now he was getting angry and also tired of the game. It had made him very hungry indeed. Ask us, said Gollum. Right? So Bilbo is having a real hard time now thinking of another riddle. He was saved by pure luck last time. He's also running out of ideas. He, again, like he was in the beginning of this chapter, all alone in the tunnel. What does he do? He's feeling around to see what he might have to help. He's trying to pinch himself and slap himself. He gripped on his little sword. He even felt in his pocket with his other hand. There he found the ring he had picked up in the passage and forgotten about. So, what have I got in my pocket? He said aloud. He was talking to himself, but Gollum thought it was a riddle. He was frightfully upset. So if it was lucky for him to guess the answer to Gollum's riddle, it might be even more lucky that when he asks himself, what have I got in my pocket? Gollum thinks, right, he's so focused on the game, Gollum thinks that that's Bilbo's riddle. And he gets really mad because that's not a fair question, really. But again, Gollum takes this game so seriously. This is life or death. And so Gollum feels that he must answer. He demands 3 guesses. Right? And so they go through the 3 guesses. He almost catches Bilbo on the first guess, right? Hands. But Bilbo has pulled his hands out of his pockets. Gollum's racking his brains, trying to think, what do people keep in pockets? Well, I keep in my pocket a sharp stone to file my fangs on, but that's not most people, right? He finally comes up with, again, something nice and violent that he would think of. Knife, right? And then, is it the last one, the bit of string or nothing? He tries to cheat. There at the very end, he kind of breaks his own rules. Maybe because he feels like Bilbo's already broken the rules by asking this question, which he can't possibly just guess. He can't do this based on riddle knowledge. This is a question that he can't figure out. How angry he must be. How unfair of the nasty little creature to ask that question, right? And Bilbo triumphantly declares that he has won the game, right? That's more than 3 guesses. Game is over. I've won. Okay. And so in the original version of this story, we see that Gollum is prepared to give in at this point. And he is going to give Bilbo a reward for winning the game. Now that's, like I say, the version that Tolkien originally wrote down and gave to the publisher, and the publisher's son liked so much. That's a version that most people have never read, okay? Because Tolkien goes back later and he revises the story. Very little, very small things, but one of the big changes is in this part of the story. Again, his original version of the story, Gollum was going to give Bilbo the reward for winning the game, and then discovers that the thing he was going to give Bilbo is already missing, right? The ring. But in the revised version, the version that most of us have read, Gollum is going back to get the ring to use it to sneak up on Bilbo, right? Because he'll be invisible and he'll be able to catch Bilbo, and he has only evil intentions in this moment. In the real version of the story, the version that we get after Tolkien makes the revisions. So why did Tolkien change that part of the story? It's like you're pointing out, Lucy, and I think a lot of you guys might know about the sequels that Tolkien writes after The Hobbit. The Lord of the Rings, he writes because his publisher comes back after The Hobbit is such a big hit and says, hey, we need a sequel to this story. And so Tolkien gets right to work. He has lots of ideas for stories, right? And so as he's writing, he's trying to think about, so what should I take from The Hobbit and what should I use to develop into this new story? Tolkien decides that he's going to use the magic ring that makes Bilbo invisible, this magic ring that Bilbo finds when he's all alone in the dark, puts in his pocket, and then it turns out that the ring not only helps him win the riddle game, right, by accident, this ring is also something that makes the wearer invisible. So it saves Bilbo again right afterwards, and again by accident, because Bilbo slips it on with his hand in his pocket. It just slips on his finger by accident, just pure luck, right? He falls over, he trips, and Gollum runs past him. Okay, that's about to happen here. But first, we get a little bit of Bilbo starting to suspect that this ring is something special. And it's the same for Tolkien. Tolkien, when he first writes the story, the ring is just a magic ring that makes you invisible. That's pretty cool. It's pretty lucky that Bilbo finds it. But later, Tolkien starts to suspect that this ring is really something quite remarkable, something much bigger. And when Tolkien decides that that's the case, he goes back, rewrites this story. All right, so here's what happens at the end of the game. Bilbo hears Gollum crying out in anguish from his island. "What's the matter?" Bilbo called. "What have you lost?" "It mustn't ask us," shrieked Gollum. "Not its business, no, Gollum. It's lost, Gollum, Gollum, Gollum." "Well, so am I," cried Bilbo, "and I want to get unlost. And I won the game, and you promised. So come along, come and let me out, and then go on with your looking." Utterly miserable as Gollum sounded, Bilbo could not find much pity in his heart, and he had a feeling that anything Gollum wanted so much could hardly be something good. "Come along," he shouted. "No, not yet, precious," Gollum answered. "We must search for it. It's lost, Gollum." "But you never guessed my last question, and you promised," said Bilbo. "Never guessed," said Gollum. Then suddenly out of the gloom came a sharp hiss. "What has it got in its pockets? Tell us that. It must tell us first. It must tell first." So Gollum has lost the game, according to Bilbo. And now Bilbo is insisting that Gollum has promised that if he loses, he's going to show Bilbo the way out, right? Gollum, on the other hand, is totally obsessed with whatever it is that he's lost. And Gollum, in this moment, with that word guess, right? It's like that triggers. He guesses. Aha. What has it got in its pockets? And what is lost? Those might be the same thing. It didn't suspect that the Hobbit could be quite so evil and sneaky, right? So in this moment, Bilbo is starting to realize just how dangerous Gollum is, right? That he's not going to abide by his promise. He's going to break his promise on the riddle game, which is an ancient and, as far as they're concerned, a totally unbreakable sort of promise, right? If you play that game, you have to play it to the end. So for Gollum to break that, that's pretty bad. But from Gollum's point of view, for Bilbo to steal this ring, right? That's what it looks like to Gollum, and then trick him and make a fool of him. Wow. I mean, what a nasty little creature. Okay. So again, Bilbo runs away, trips, has the ring on. Luckily, Gollum runs past. Bilbo starts to figure out, by overhearing Gollum, not only that this ring makes you invisible, but also that Gollum thinks that Bilbo knows more than he's letting on. Gollum thinks Bilbo's already headed for the exit, which is a little bit irrational, right? If you slow down, Gollum would realize Bilbo hadn't any idea how to get out. That was what he wanted, right? So there's a little disconnect there where Gollum is thinking a little bit ahead of himself. He heads for the exit to catch Bilbo. Bilbo luckily can follow him to the exit, and now Gollum knows he's there. He hears him or smells him. Bilbo almost stopped breathing and went stiff himself. He was desperate. He must get away, out of this horrible darkness, while he had any strength left. He must fight. He must stab the foul thing, put its eyes out, kill it. It meant to kill him. No, not a fair fight. He was invisible now. Gollum had no sword. Gollum had not actually threatened to kill him, or tried to yet. And he was miserable, alone, lost. A sudden understanding, a pity mixed with horror, welled up in Bilbo's heart. A glimpse of endless unmarked days without light or hope of betterment, hardstone, cold fish, sneaking and whispering. All these thoughts passed in a flash of a second. He trembled. And then quite suddenly, in another flash, as if lifted by a new strength and resolve, he leaped. No great leap for a man, but a leap in the dark. Straight over Gollum's head he jumped, 7 feet forward and 3 in the air. Indeed, had he known it, he only just missed cracking his skull on the low arch of the passage. So again, Bilbo does something that's more amazing than he even knows, right? He doesn't know how close he is to hitting his head. He doesn't know that he can escape without killing Gollum, right? And the reader is kind of stuck there too. Is Bilbo leaping forward to cut open a way? Is he going to stab Gollum? No, he's leaping over Gollum's head, right? And he's literally above Gollum, and of course he's also morally above Gollum now, right? He has faced this choice to kill him or let him go, and he's made the choice to get his escape and let Gollum live. As nasty, as dangerous as Gollum is, he argues to himself, it wouldn't be fair, right? I have a sword, he doesn't. I have the ring, he doesn't. And what a miserable, he has pity for Gollum. He finally can take pity, which he wasn't able to do before, right? So there was that parallel, and in that moment, they're both kind of frozen, facing each other. But Bilbo is the one lifted by a new strength and resolve, right? He makes his choice. He leaps. Again, later in the story, when Tolkien comes back to look at this again, he takes this moment as being super important. This idea of letting Gollum live turns out to have major effects. And so that turning point of Bilbo's story that we saw at the start of chapter 5, it's a turning point in his career, right? Finding the ring, that's huge, but also following the light of that ancient sword that he has, right? And following his own moral choice. That's a big turning point too. So a lot of important stuff here in this game that Bilbo wins, definitely. Gollum loses, definitely. All right. So there's a little more to go here. We'll pass over for the sake of time, because Bilbo does still have to escape some of the goblins who know from Gollum shrieking and carrying on down there, something's happening, right? And they almost catch him. They can see the light from outside cast that shadow on Bilbo, and they know that somebody's stuck in the door and they're about to catch him, and Bilbo busts through, his buttons pop off, right? He's just skinny enough to squeeze through the door, so lucky for him he hasn't been eating, as hungry as he is, okay? And he's out, he's escaped. He dashes away. Again, think about what's Bilbo gained. Some solid gains for Bilbo in this chapter. And as you're reading on for tomorrow, chapter 6 and 7, into the wild again. We're going to look at the capital W wild. We'll think more about this idea of good luck and even some bad luck too, how those things connect. So think about what the new creatures that we meet this time. So we just met goblins. Now we get wargs and eagles and Beorn. In the next reading, we get some more examples of good luck and bad luck. So think about all of that. If you've got some questions and ideas, again, if you've got cool things that you've been making and writing in your journals or drawing or playing fun games, if you come up with cool riddles, share all that along. If you haven't done so yet, signumuniversity.org/academy. That's the correct address, I think. You can find us there. Please register and let us know you're listening. Even if you're watching this after the fact, not too late to let us know. Send us emails, camp@signumu.org. And I look forward to hearing from you and talking again tomorrow. Take care.